Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we got another collaborative hip hop record on the docket, this time from Grae and Quelle Chris, called Everything's Fine. You know, it's very rare when I find a record I can approach for a review in so many different ways, but here we are. I mean, I could talk about how we've had a pretty damn strong first quarter of 2018 when it comes to underground hip-hop. I could talk about the strong undercurrents of political relevance that are reinvigorated and increasingly refined and relevant in the scene, thanks to much of the nonsense associated with the current United States administration, and a social conscience that seems to at least be getting some critical respect these days. Nice change of pace there. Or I could talk about the artists themselves, both underground veterans, but for very different reasons and almost in very different eras. Grae for her critically acclaimed work with Ninth Wonder throughout the 2000s, spawning a fair few great records and one damn near classic with Genius. And when Quelle Chris for his slightly more inconsistent but no less compelling set of work in the 2010s as a rapper and producer, much of which led to the record that I reviewed and praised pretty heavily last year, Being You Is Great, I Wish I Could Be You More Often. I have to go back to that record, it's really quite something. It grows on you a fair bit. Hell, I can talk about their distinctive sensibilities being a fascinating match for each other, and how, when you think about it, I'm not sure I could think of a husband and wife hip-hop duo ever delivering a project together in the history of the genre. Yeah, there's Cardi B and Offset's collaborative songs, but they don't remotely feel the same. They're not yet married, and I doubt they'll ever make a project together in this vein, and let's be honest, none of that seems like it's really gonna last long-term, especially in the past couple of weeks from what we've seen. But with Grae and Quelle Chris, it seems tangible, it seems real, and I was absolutely fascinated how they would work together on this album called Everything's Fine, which just by that title lets you know that it's not going to shy away from the socio-political undercurrents right now and just getting by in these very turbulent times. So yeah, I definitely saw the appeal. I had a lot of high expectations given their previous collaborations. So what do we get on Everything's Fine? Well, okay, this is a bit of a tricky record to talk about. Hell, I could preface every project in Quelle Chris's immediate orbit as falling in this territory, but this one's a little different. Mostly because so much of its thematic core is about engaging with some of that uncomfortable complexity and drilling deeper, especially bottled beneath the terse statement that yes, everything is fine. And yet, even with that, it's the sort of statement that for many people, it's a necessary deflection, a smokescreen just to keep your sanity amongst everything else falling apart around you, even if that smokescreen's stinging your eyes more than you would prefer. In short, Grae and Quelle Chris have delivered the sort of conceptual project that might seem a little bit easier to take in than, say, Being You Is Great, I Wish I Could Be You More Often, and it is, but that's just on the surface. The discomfort of this album, and what makes it genuinely great, maybe even one of the best records of this year, it's right beneath that, and oh my god, it's so worth digging up. But let's start off with Grae and Quelle Chris as MCs, because in terms of flows and style, they're very different rappers. Grae is a lot more technical and sharp, leaning into faster, more aggressive flows and tighter interlaced wordplay, while Quelle Chris is more unkempt and off-kilter around the beat. The sort of rhymes that do mostly connect, but in peculiar ways. And while they do maintain their own distinctive styles, you can tell they kind of rub off on each other on this album. Grae's always had a playful, sardonic side that I really liked, but Quelle Chris encourages her to be a little more slippery and challenging, whereas some of her bars seem to inspire some of him with have some welcome tightness and focus to come back, which from albums like Ghost in the Finish Line and Shotgun and Sleek Rifle from his discography, that's definitely a side of him I like and I'm happy to see return. And while this record can start to drag a little bit in its final quarter with multiple songs nearing or passing the 5-minute mark, there's definitely a lot more momentum overall, helped by guests that can handle some of the more consistent, kind of complicated tone. There isn't quite the sudden shift of gears that characterized the second half of Being You Is Great, I Wish I Could Be You More Often, and it helps that subtler, creeping sense of weary unease. So take for instance Big Tone. He brings a sharp brand of braggadocious confidence that demands alcohol to really come to the forefront against the unstable, oily warbles of that beat. The Smoking Man brings up Denmark Vassey to point out every finger at streams of conspiracy theories to avoid any possible complicity that he himself might have. Your Old Drew, he easily plays into the guttural bragging of Scoop of Dirt, emphasizing how all the further outside the norm they can play outside of that system, despite kind of being within it. Mosel's contemplative but optimistic side plays really well after the confessional bars on Waiting for the Moon, and Hannibal Buress, Okay, the verse wasn't really good on OhSh, but it did fit the quasi-stone instability that characterized the rest of the song, and it was pretty funny in a kind of goofy way. I didn't mind it, even if I do think the verse is the weakest on the album. And it is that quasi-comedic sensibility that I like to focus on, at least as a major part of this content. Because while Quelle Chris has always had a certain wry brand of humor, so has Jean Grae, for being honest, I was reminded a lot of Open Mike Eagle's dark comedy and his recruitment of comedians to further explore that laughing in the face of greater darkness and instead of crying. And yet it's very telling that Quelle Chris has both John Hodgman and Nick Offerman deliver their interludes as the mostly soothing voices telling us that everything is gonna be okay. It's all gonna be fine. Everything is fine. But here's the thing. Well, it's established very early on that pretty much everybody knows that's bullshit. Quelle Chris and Jean Grae, they're interested in digging deeper and in confronting why we put up those layers of deflection, why we say everything is fine. Some of it is quite literally a survival mechanism against overstimulation in the modern world, especially in a world full of people who have little to no interest in engaging with nuance or listening, which is established very early on my contribution to this scam, amidst a cloud of ignorant or very shallow takes on hip-hop that deep down they both know by engaging with some of the culture they might share at least a portion of culpability. It's one reason I don't actually take any offense to Jean Grae calling out YouTube reviewers directly on that song, because in dealing with and misinterpreting the culture at large and the deeper complexities of hip-hop which goes over people's heads, it's not like she's all that wrong. I'm gonna be honest there. And those deeper deconstructions and forced nuance erupt all over this record, from Quelle Chris sarcastically rattling through commonly held expectations by anyone where there's probably more layers into them, reinforced by Jean Grae's confident embrace of complexity, even as she calls out those who have less cultural burden to conform to a type for their refusal to have some sort of self-examination. And as she says on the very next song, Peacock, without privilege, you ponder those basics. You start digging into those nooks and crannies, and you start wondering whether or not it's even all that fine at that level. And that's where you hit the great tragedy that both MCs, they know on that bone-deep level. For as much as they scream for self-awareness and digging deeper and fighting against the systems that would seek easy categorization for minorities or outsider voices, systems that on songs like Zero, Jean Grae takes solo because she knows that just by her presence alone, she can showcase that fragility in that system, but they're still part of the culture at large. There's that endemic weight of systemic racism and sexism highlighted on Breakfast of Champions, where even after decades, there's still so much more to do. It can almost exact a physical or mental or emotional toll, especially among those who can't help but be aware of it at all times. And then you have The Smoking Man, which showcases how it is so much easier to create conspiracy theories for excuses or find some vestige of comfort in parts of the system that they can use rather than admit any sort of responsibility in themselves. And hey, an interlude just before that on Doing Better Than Ever, we have Dapwell musing that even though it's bad right now for them, for someone somewhere else, it's the best they've ever been living in that system. So why not take the deep breath and reassure yourself that everything's fine, right? And for other artists in their place, even most of those who are willing to dig deeper, this would be where they would admit some form of defeat. They're both older MCs after all. They're not really in the mainstream. They've captured the full range of nuance. They realize the implacable human behavior that can be given, and given their own roles, it's not like either of them can really change it. Except neither of them do that. Jean Grae primes the pump on Zero, but it's the final two songs where that downbeat, tired realism has only served to hone a yearning earnestness for something to be better, with that cleansing dawn of mature truth and the realization that any change they want to make will have to be coming from themselves, all against the soulful vocals of Anna Wise, the muted keys, the gleaming touches of strings and flutes, and on River, one of the most triumphant blasts of guitar I've heard on a hip-hop album in a long damn time. A fantastic lead-in for Quelle Chris's musings on human imperfections, and the subtle assurance to himself that everything's okay. And so they say. And you know what? I haven't even got to much of the production on this album yet, or the wealth of interlaced quotable bars from both MCs that couldn't help but bring a smile on my face. They're really damn funny, and I can respect that. Now, I'll save the bars for your own exploration. Seriously, Jean Grae and Quelle Chris bring so many distinctive flows and sets of references that you'll want to take them in directly and just absorb them with time. But what's also very telling is that Quelle Chris and Jean Grae also both contributed production to this project. They kept it all in-house. Now, Quelle Chris a little more, more, but with Jean Grae's work on River and Peacock, she's definitely got her fair share of highlights. And well, I definitely found it pretty damn sharp how Jean Grae flipped her flow into a very peculiar rollick that I really liked on Gold, Purple, Orange. It's the lumpy murk of the bass, the lingering touches of saxophone with a great outro there. What really differentiates this record from, say, the last Quelle Chris album, it's its relatively accessible feel and a sense of momentum. Nowhere close to being as dense or hazy as his previous work. While this album still has a relatively loose relationship with the idea of hooks, it still feels remarkably smooth at spots. From the fuzzy buzz of the sparse beat and synth bass on My Contribution to the Scam, the ominous warping tolls of the Smoking Man against the rattling boom bap touches in the beat, to all those interludes which have the smooth, soothing tones of a mid-afternoon game show or a bit of an infomercial. Of course, the more ugly, oppressive side does roil up. I've already talked about Scoop of Dirt, but then we get the oppressive, flattened vocal filters on Breakfast of Champions against the organ and bass, everything just crushing down, or the nasal grind of Zero that's almost got some chiptune elements, all of which serves as a distinctive contrast to the dank, slightly muffled percussion around OhSh, which gets even more wry and grimy with the low end of House Call, with the wonky synth warbles, the hints of chiptune, and a swamped out jazzy hook. And there's really a jazzy vibe across a lot of these songs with that saxophone. And yet, even despite these moments of abrasion, the vocals are more audible, the mixing is more well-balanced than it's ever been, all of it contributing to the feeling of subtle, chill accessibility, but ever so slightly throwing you on edge until the psychological weight becomes too much to bear, that bit of irritation and pressure, which makes the fraction of the release in the final few songs all the more potent, all the more striking, and it really hits home. In short, you know what? This is one of those collaborations that the more I thought about it, the more I wrote about it, the more I couldn't find things to complain about or nitpick about it. The thematic intricacy is top-notch, the production delivers a woozy but frequently detailed and melodically compelling tone, the bars are top-notch from both MCs, and Jean Grae and Quelle Chris show a level of creative chemistry on production and interplay, and balance that is so rarely paralleled, underground or otherwise. And when you consider it doesn't have the pacing issues that bothered me so much about Being You Is Great, I wish it could be you more often. You know, I'm not quite sure it beats Genius, but this is still something really special. And I'd argue it'll quietly become not just one of the best hip-hop records of the year, but one of the best albums of this year. Period. For me, it's a light 9 out of 10, absolutely recommended. Especially if you're looking for an always insightful, frequently funny, often heartbreaking, and yet remarkably poignant record with bars to spare. It's not an easy album, but when everything's fine, for those of you who know better, it rarely is all that easy. But yeah, you're definitely going to check this out because it might not be easy, but it is something special. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe. I'd be more than grateful. I had a lot to say about this one, but yeah, this is something special. I was surprised how much it gripped me because how melodic it is, how well the bars connect, how well they have great interplay together. It is just a really, really stunning little album. I think a lot of people are going to hop on board. This is going to be one. It's going to be a sleeper. I can guarantee that, but it's one to watch. You're definitely going to want to buy the record. Links in the description below. And I got the poll up there. I'm curious where you guys fall on it. I'm not sure as many people will love it the same way I do, but yeah, I hope you do because it is something special. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process, link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. I've recently changed my Patreon from a per video to a per month structure, so if that makes your selection process to hop on board all the easier, there's your chance. I'd be happy for you guys to get on board. And if you want to see a schedule, it's on my Instagram, link below. But until next time, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.